Hello and welcome to another episode of the AAIM High Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Shin, and today's guest is someone who took one of the boldest leaps we've seen on this podcast, Jenny Shao. Jenny was on the path to becoming a Harvard-trained doctor, but instead of following the traditional path, she made the courageous decision to leave medicine behind and build a startup from the ground up. That leap of faith has since paid off in a big way. She's now the founder and CEO of an emotionally intelligent AI company called Robyn that has recently raised $5.5 million in their seed round, led by M13. Some of the investors include the co-founder of Google Maps, Bill Tai, seed investor in Canva, Goldman, former CFO of Yahoo, and Robyn is quickly growing. And I'm excited to talk with their CEO today, Jenny Shao. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
All right, so we'll first start off with talking about your childhood and upbringing. Because this podcast is centered around being an Asian American leader in business, it is important to first understand each guest's childhood and upbringing as an Asian American. Ideas instilled within you from your parents and your environment may have helped you become successful in where you are today. So could you explain your childhood situation growing up? Where did you grow up? Did you have any siblings? What were family dynamics like?
Yeah, so I grew up actually mostly in Chicago, but we're immigrants, so we're first-gen immigrants. My parents and I settled in this little town called Ames, Iowa, when I was about 7. And when I first, came to the U.S., I actually knew one English word. It was car. And now I barely speak Chinese, which is quite unfortunate. I'm trying to pick that back up. But yeah, when I think about my childhood, I really think of it as very magical, even though to I think the outsider it didn't really seem magical. We had very little in terms of material things. My dad was a graduate student, and he took home about $1,000 a month, right? And he had a family of 3 to take care of.
Wow.
But I think from that, what I kind of maybe have lacked in material possessions, my parents more than made up for in just how much they love me and how and I never felt wanting for opportunities. I
Mm.
remember my dad taught me math, he taught me physics, we would stargaze together, and he very very seriously told me, Jenny, anything you want to do you can do, you just have to put your mind to it. And it was a very very somber thing for a 7-year-old. I'm like, I just want to play, you know and but I have fantastic parents, and I learned hard work from them because seeing them working day in day out, right, to make a better life for themselves and for their daughter, that really stuck with me. And I think people say oh, where does your hard work come from? It came from this osmosis, looking at my parents. And for me, they took the biggest plunge than I ever could, right? They
Mm.
left culture they knew, the country they knew, friends, family, and security, everything. And they packed their bags in the 3 suitcases and then went across the world. And it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, actually, my grandmother, she immigrated to Chicago, and that's where my dad and uncle actually grew up. And then I was actually born in
Yeah.
Chicago. So
Oh,
that's just a
amazing.
funny
Native
connection.
Chicagoan. Yeah.
So yeah, I grew up in Chicago for just a couple years, but then we had to move because of my dad's job. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and how did your parents' experiences as immigrants influence your perspective on success? You kind of already talked about the chance for opportunities, but how about success?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think, there's a very conventional, oh, Asian parents, right? The joke is that you can be a doctor, a lawyer, or a failure.
Yeah.
And my parents definitely weren't like that.
Mm.
Growing up, they obviously wanted me to do well, right? They want being, doing well in school was really important to them, but it was through the lens of having opportunity, right? They've, struggled because they were immigrants and they did everything that they could to make sure their daughter, would have a better life. And so they never were one to really push me in terms of being oh, you have to, be a doctor or be a lawyer. I very much want to be, a doctor because when I was, when I from 0 until the age of 7, I was raised by my great grandma, who I called her Tai
Mm.
Tai. Right.
Mm.
And she was my superhero. This woman was I think 72 years old when I was born, and she can
Wow.
run faster than I did, and she was really my everything. She helped raise me. She gave me extra ice cream when my mom wasn't looking. And then about a year after I came to the States, she passed away from lung cancer.
Oh, I'm
And
so sorry.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. But to me, I was 8, right? So I was just I don't know what lung cancer is. I just know that it took away the one person that I really, 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 like that meant the most to me.
Mm,
And that's how kind of my interest in being a doctor started, right? Is that I wanted to make sure that I could be there for, people in the future when their loved ones were going through something difficult because I couldn't be there, for my own great grandma. I was on the other side of the world. I didn't even know she was sick.
yeah.
And that's kind of what instilled in me, okay, I'm going to be a doctor. And my mom was actually like, are you sure? Like being a doctor is really hard. Like you can just go to, like you went to Columbia, just go get a job, like, be a
Yeah.
normal person. And I was like, no, I'm gonna go be a doctor. And yeah, so they've always just supported me and even when they disagree with what I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, and that's so like admirable at even like such a young age. Like you wanted
Yeah.
to become a doctor because of like the person that you really looked up to.
Yeah.
And did you feel any like pressure to conform to certain expectations as you immigrated to the US when you were like around 8 years old, either from like your family or from like the broader community, like school?
Yeah, so I think if, I have one thing going for me is that I don't really care what other people think. And I don't know, something is just like missing in my brain. But
Yeah.
I think a lot of my best decisions were, I think, quite controversial because they were not conventional, or like leaving medicine, jumping ahead a little bit. And at each time, people were just like, what are people going to think of you?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I don't really care, because
Mm,
this is my life. I know what I want to do with it, and I know the impact I want to have. And like, I can't blame anybody else if my life doesn't turn out the way it does because I was like, oh, what do people think? But I think, growing up in terms of expectations, I was probably a bit oblivious, to them. And to be honest, like when I was growing up, like I was just like, I was like a happy kid.
yeah.
And, I think I started doing well in school, and then got really interested in science and obviously, did a lot of research, but none of it was really through the lens of like expectation. And I think in that way, my parents were quite different in that they were just like, we want you to do well. We want you to have a good career and be happy. But they were never like, oh, you have to, be a lawyer or you have to be a doctor.
Mm,
They just wanted to make sure that I can have a good life.
yeah. And were there any specific experiences, events, or lessons learned during your childhood that you believe set some foundation for your future success? You already talked about like hard work and just how your parents instilled that within you from like their jobs, but was there anything else like a specific moment or like a story?
Yeah, I think, maybe not from like, early childhood, but I do remember. So, when I was 13, I started doing research. And that
Wow.
sounds very impressive, but it's actually like a lot more funny than it's impressive. So, like I mentioned to you, like my type passed away from lung cancer. And when I started doing well in school and in science, we had like a school science fair.
Mm,
Um, and at the time, it was when, MRSA, the superbug, was breaking out. So I decided for my project, I wanted to study, bacteria and why they're, resistant to antibiotics. And so, like, any 13-year-old, I went online and I was like, hey, mom, can I borrow your credit card? And she was that I never bought anything before. And she was like, yeah, sure, whatever. It's for your school. Yeah, happy to. And this is like, I've like had not bought any clothes. I've never bought anything. And and then like she was like, "Oh, what did you buy?" And I was like, "I bought a science kit with E. coli." And she was like, "I'm sorry, what? You bought bacteria into our house?" And I
yeah.
was like, "Yeah, it's for a science project." And we didn't have, like at the time, like obviously, like we didn't have an incubator because, like, why would you, right? So
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, just use our oven. This exact same thing, about 300 degrees, hotter. Who cares, right?" And
Yeah.
I put it in our oven, and they all died, obviously, because
Yeah.
like it was an oven. That's the point. It's to kill bacteria,
Yeah.
and which is great because otherwise, we would have all died. But that did not go well for my science project. And, my mom's like, cool, great. She's gonna do something normal now, like, make a volcano or something.
Yeah.
Um, and I was like, no, I need to call a real lab. I need to, go to Northwestern and, go get a real lab. And she was like, how are you going to do that? Like, like we don't know anybody, like we're
Yeah.
immigrants, like we still have very little. And she's like, do you know someone? And I was like, no, 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 I'm just going to call them. And she was like, right, cool. And then I think she thought I was joking, but then she like went, I think, in the kitchen to do something, came back, and I was like on the phone. I think I typed Northwestern and clicked some random department. It was like immunology. And then I called the first professor, who was like Dr. Melissa Brown. So shout out to her. She's amazing. And I found her lab number and I called. And I
Yeah.
just saw my mom's like face just like turn white. And she was like, no, you can't do that. And then like her lab picked up and she was like, hello, this is the Brown lab. And I was like, oh, can I talk to Dr. Brown? And they were
Yeah.
like, who are you? Eventually, like I got through to her, and I was like, hey, I'm Jenny. I'm in seventh grade. Like, I would love to use your lab for my science fair project. And like, she just burst out laughing. And to this day, I'm just like, it was a miracle because like she said, yeah, she was like, yeah, let's do it. And she was so kind. And like we drove there. I did my science fair project there, and she had some, really kind, poor graduate student babysit me. But that's how, my love for science really got sparked because I was just like, wow, here's a, group of people that are doing research so that other people won't die in the future. And like that's so cool, right? Instead of just
Yeah.
waiting, you can take an active role in shaping what the future looks like. And I was hooked. But I think the lesson there for me is that I didn't know any better, right? I was 13. I didn't know the etiquette. Like you can't just call like a full-fledged professor.
Yeah.
So I was like, why not? There's a phone number here, right?
Yeah.
And I think that has, been something that has worked well,
Yeah.
for me is that just by not really having the strictures and limitations of, knowing too much or maybe like
Mm.
knowing more, I'm just like, well, might as well as give it a try. And it's like served me well as a founder.
Yeah. And where do you think like that ambition comes from? Is I can't imagine like a seventh grader like calling like a Northwestern lab. Like have you just
No,
like
there
always
was
had that?
ambition. I think I was just oblivious. I think I was
Oh,
just, I really didn't realize like what's the big deal, It's like she's really, really cool and I would love to get to know her. So worst thing she can say is no. And in my mind, I was just like, oh yeah, like, here's a problem and then here's a solution. So I'm going to try to get that solution to work. If it doesn't, okay, that's fine. But it like very, very luckily, like worked out. And
yeah.
I'm grateful to, to her to this day because it was so much more than a science project. It was something that showed me that you can take action and, a lot of times things won't work, but sometimes it will. And you have to just, try.
Yeah. And as we move on to the second part of the podcast, talking about education and earlier career, what was your college experience like? And were you like always set on becoming a doctor in the future? And did you ever think of founding a startup while you were in college?
Yeah, so no, never. Like it's funny, I think I am the definitely not in the mold of Silicon Valley of, like CS degree, college dropout, I'm like a solo female, non-technical founder. So, but when I was in college, I was, like all the way in terms of, being a doctor. I was pre-med. I shadowed a neurosurgeon. So I knew pretty, early on that I want to, do surgery. And if you had told me, oh, you'll be like a founder of a company, I've been like, that's insane. Like, why would I do that? And it was just like not even on my radar. But yeah, I mean, like college, I went to Columbia and I feel like a lot of Colombians agree that, Colombia's ethos is kind of like will break you down. And if you, like survive, you'll be stronger.
Yeah.
Which is quite different from I think Harvard's ethos, having been at both.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I loved, my time with like the student body at Columbia.
Mm.
I think
Yeah.
some of like my best friends, but also just amazing people were people that I met, when I was in college. And I think the spirit of like the students there have always been one that, really stood up for things that they believe in.
Yeah. And I know a little bit about this story, but for the people that don't know and are listening, what motivated you to start Robyn? And was there like a specific moment or experience?
Yeah. So So I went to medical school and then, I went to Cleveland College of Medicine, learned college of medicine. And it was great because it was, I think at the time, the only program that had a full ride scholarship. They chose like 32 students. And then, I graduated, started residency in surgery, and it seemed like cool. Like everything, was everything you ever wanted, right? Like, I want to be a surgeon. Now I'm trying to be a surgeon. But it became pretty obvious, right? Like the brochure of medicine was quite different than, the actual reality of medicine. I
Mm.
very much thought that I would be, spending like, 80 hours a week, right? Like saving lives and operating. I think if you ask any resident that, they'll tell you that's not true, right? And we're in a system, in our healthcare system, that is not really built to help people. It's built to help
Mm.
insurance companies. And I did not take an oath to make insurance companies richer, right? I took an oath to do no harm and to actually help people, like actual human people live better lives and do everything that I could, in that service. And I realized that our healthcare system was not doing that. At the same time, it was around COVID, right? So there was a massive amount of loneliness and just emotional disconnection. I remember seeing a patient, with the GBM and COVID, on top of that, it was like not doing well. And he was just dying alone in the ICU. And we could not get anybody to come see this man. I had like
Yeah.
no friends, no family. And I was just like, how did we get here to become a society where this is just normal, right? Like this is not normal. This is very abnormal. We are deeply, wired in our biology to connect, right? Like as human beings, we need to understand ourselves. We need to connect to other people. And it didn't feel like that problem was remotely being solved or even addressed, in healthcare. And it came at a crossroads where it's like, well, if I want to do something, actually uphold my oath, right, and do something with my life to solve this problem and look back on something like I can be proud of, it wasn't going to be in conventional medicine, right? It wasn't going to be in surgery. And it was a very, very painful realization because, for really 14 years since I was 17 years old, right? Probably, longer, I told myself, like, I am a surgeon.
Yeah.
And, after 14 years telling yourself the same story, that's not just your profession, that's not just your job, that becomes who you are, that becomes part
Mm.
of your
Your
identity,
identity.
right?
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you walk away from yourself? It's a very messy process. And, but then I realized, like, you know, my identity is just a story I told myself for a very, very long time. So maybe I can tell myself a different one, right? A better one that actually empowers me and makes whatever I build not beholden to insurance companies, but beholden to the people that I took a, vow to actually, do something for in this life. And yeah, and then when I realized that, I decided to leave medicine. And then, start Robyn. And at the time, I think everybody thought I had gone out of my mind. We had some very memorable quotes, and they're all from well-meaning people. None of them were like malicious, but they were like,
Yeah.
Jenny, you're gonna die under a bridge. Like, how are you gonna eat? How are you gonna feed your dogs? Like, this will
Yeah.
be, like you'll regret this decision for the rest of your life. And, to their point, if you leave residency, you're done. Like there's no there's no going back, right?
Yeah.
And residents are paid about, maybe like $10 an hour. So it's not great pay, but it's institutionalized in a way that if you stop, like, you don't have that, right? And my family, we have no money. So there wasn't like my parents were just like, Jenny, like if this doesn't work out, like we can't help you,
Yeah.
right? And but I got to a point where I'm just like, that's fine. I'll try for Uber. I'm not above that. My parents came from the other side of the world and they made a life for themselves. Give me 2 years, like I'll try for Uber. I'll, work at McDonald's, whatever I need to do, right?
Yeah.
And if I drove for Uber, I would 8x my pay overnight. So I'm
Yeah.
okay with that.
Yeah.
And it got to a point where I'm just like, I will do whatever it takes to build this because this is what, I think the world needs. And this is what I need to do to actually uphold my oath. So I left and it was the best decision I ever made in my life.
Yeah, and how did you come up with like the core idea? And because you don't come from like a coding background, so what was that process
I don't-
of like actually creating the app, like the very like the first model, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I did was, to assemble a really, really great team. So we raised a very small amount of, pre-seed and assembled, we just hired 2 devs, and then together, we made our first MVP. So it's
Mm.
been an incredibly iterative process. And, I remember when I, really left, right, pulled the plug, resigned. I think it was on December 6th, and now I celebrate that as my Independence Day. Um, but I was just like, wow, okay, it's real now. But also to everyone's point, I had no network, no product, no team, no, no money, like nothing, right?
Yeah.
And like my network were like surgeons, which weren't, it's great, but like it wasn't going to be super helpful in this like next chapter of my life.
Hmm.
So I just like ravenously consumed like everything I get my hands on. And there's a lot on the internet, as it turns out, right?
Yeah.
I think I watched like every episode of, Guy Raz's How I Built This. I watched like, and around the same time, I think the YouTube gods sent me like a video of Melanie Perkins of Canva. And I
Mm.
don't know, I was still in, I think, messing at this point. I clicked on it. And something, about the way she talked about how she built Canva and what Canva stands for really just like resonated with me. And I was just like, oh, wow, like if she can do it, then maybe I can too, right? Because, Melanie, like she surmounted so many obstacles in her
Yeah.
Canva. And, from her like story, I learned about, Bill Tai and like Lars Rasmussen, who obviously, figures very prominently into the Canva story. I remember thinking, wow, I would love to have Bill and Lars in my life. And I was just like, how's that going to happen? Like, I
Yeah.
don't know them. I don't know anybody who even know anyone who knows them.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was, when I was at Harvard, I just messaged Bill, like out of the blue. I sent him a LinkedIn message. I think it was after like a glass of wine. I'm like, well, worst thing that happens is that he doesn't see it.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, Bill, I'm Jenny. I'm a doctor at Harvard. I, built this MVP. It was like a very janky web app. Didn't really work very well. Told him the vision. I was like, I, really inspired by you and Melanie. Love to connect. And I
Yeah.
just like sent that into ether. I was like, this, he's never gonna reply. And then the next day he replied. He was like,
Wow.
oh, like this is a great idea. Send it to my fund. He has a fund called Second Capital that does like tech for good. Um,
Hmm.
and then I got on the call with their managing partner, Carolina Casas, and we had like a 90-minute call, supposed to be like, I think a 30-minute call. So we
Yeah.
went on for, 90 minutes. And then a few weeks later, they were like, yeah, this makes sense. We'll take the round. And
Wow.
by that time, I had talked to like, 30 investors, and they were just like, no, you know, they're like non-tech female, like this is like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And Girl, she just got it. Her and her sister Berta have an amazing fund called Senga, and they gave us, our start. So they invested, and we, that was a big part of our pre-seed. And then Bill introduced me to Lars Rasmussen, who founded Google Maps, and is just one of the most brilliant, amazing, kind human beings on this planet.
Hmm.
And we just recently did our launch at one of his festivals in Greece called Panathenia. But I'm so grateful to Lars and to Bill and all these people who took a bet on me very, very early on. And I think now, we're doing very well, but I will be forever grateful to them.
Yeah, I find kind of feel the same way with you sometimes with like sending LinkedIn messages because like even for like the podcast, like I'll look up all these people and I'm like they would never respond, but like I'll send like 100 or something, and then sometimes
Exactly.
I'll get like a couple and I'm like, wow, they really
Yeah.
saw the message, and like and then those conversations end up being like fantastic. So it's just
Yeah.
really like just taking initiative and just like putting yourself out there, and then you never know what can happen.
Exactly. I've met some of the most amazing people just through, cold DMs.
Yeah.
And I think it also makes me want to pay it forward is that, if we are fortunate enough to build Robin into what I know it will be, I also want to do everything that I can, for future entrepreneurs and future, doctors, which are just humans, right? Because like people like, Bill and Lars like took a chance on me and they didn't have to, right? Like there was no reason at the time to, but
Yeah.
they did. And now we built this amazing thing.
Yeah, and what are some of like the biggest lessons you've learned from Bill and Lars because they've have such great careers? Like
Yeah.
any like tips or anything that they taught you that was really helpful?
Yeah, I think a lot of people will say they invest in the founder. I think the really amazing thing about, Bill and Lars is that they really, really do invest in the founder,
Mm.
and I met Lars for breakfast here in San Francisco before he invested and kind of just told him, my life story, right? Because he was like, why do you build Robin? And I like, told him in excruciating detail, like every reason why I'm building Robin. And I think, and he was like, yeah, I'm in. And, he was like, I back the founder and that I believe you will build a good company. And that belief, means so much to me is that, what I learned from them is that you have to take a chance on the people and like the people are the most important thing. Right. And I think
Mm.
even as I assemble a team right now, it's all about making sure you have the right people. I think it's like there's a lot of, hype on like, oh, like org strategies and growth. And I think like step one to having a well-functioning team is to have the right team, which sounds
Yeah.
like very obvious, but for me, I have two non-negotiables and everything else, I mean, we'll learn on the job, but my two non-negotiables are one, integrity, and two, you have to care. Like you have
Yeah.
to fundamentally care, right? Which means you have to be scrappy. You have to just make things happen. You have to have ownership. And I think in a startup, it's so, so different than, maybe like big tech where everything is much more prescripted. In a
Mm.
startup, you just have to figure it out. And the whole
Yeah.
team depends on everybody having that mindset. And as long as you have, integrity and you have that, like that's everything that I look for.
Yeah. And when you were first starting out building Robyn, what were some of like the biggest challenges? And did you have any like doubts with the product and like how did you handle that, I guess?
Yeah, so I never had a doubt with the product. Maybe I think I'm partially delusional. I think obviously the product is going to iterate and it's going to grow and it's going to look, like from the outside very different. But I think the
Mm.
soul and the core of the product has really stayed the same since day one, right? We want to empower people to connect. We want them to know themselves. We want them to know other people. Because I think like a lot of the remedy for a lot of things going on in the world right now is community, right? Is connection,
Mm.
is knowing that like we are more alike than we are different. And that, comes from a lot of self-understanding and self-awareness, and it comes from an ability to actually connect with other people. And in terms of obstacles, it's been definitely a really fun ride. We just closed our $5 million seed round. We have found some amazing investors. M13 led our round, and they've been just fantastic partners. All of our current investors also, followed on. But yeah, we spoke to over 100 VCs for that round, and I thought, when I went in, I thought it was the hardest was going to be convincing investors to invest, right? I thought, like, oh, I'm
Mm.
going to say something, they would say no. That was not at all the hardest problem. The hardest problem was even like getting into a room with an investor, right? Or even, booking a meeting. I always hear fellow founders, say like, you should have 10 meetings, a day. I'm like, I would love that. I couldn't get 10 meetings a week because like I couldn't even find investors to give me the time of day, right? They'd be
Yeah.
like, who are you? Like literally you have the checkbox, the zero checkbox, right, of Silicon Valley, and I check zero of those boxes, right? It's just like female, like over 30, and like non-technical, solo founder, not from tech. It's like literally the opposite, checklist. And there's like, yeah, I don't think that makes, I'm not gonna take a bet on that, but like I just kept going because I was just like, I'm going to find someone that understands this, and I'm going to find an amazing partner, and and then we'll let our work and product speak for itself. And so I just kept going, and we ended up finding our lead investor. It was like I went to an event here. I went to like every single event in SF, and there's a lot of event in SF, right? So I was
Yeah.
just like, I don't really have like this sort of network, right? Because I think the advice is like just tap your network. I'm like, I don't have one.
Yeah.
Like my network is like residents and med students, um, and then so I'm like, well, then I have to make one, right? Obviously, we got some great intros from our current investors, but I think as a founder, you really have to hit the pavement. And I think the myth of like, oh, I just make a call and then there's like 100 investors is kind of, it's not, at least for me, like really true. So like I just pounded the pavement and went to all these events. And then at one event I met someone who he seemed interested in Robyn. It was a masquerade party, so people were there to like have a good time, and I was
Yeah.
like, "No, I'm here to close a deal."
Yeah.
Right? And I was like, "Oh, let me show you." And he mentioned that he knew like some investors, and I was like, "Give me their names."
Yeah.
um, and I was like, "Let's get lunch tomorrow." And I pulled out my Google Calendar, and he was like, "Whoa, this is a lot. Like I'm just trying to have a good time." Right?
Yeah.
And, so we got lunch, and then he introduced me to one of his friends who does like investing at the growth stage, and he was, super lovely. But he's like, I don't really invest in early stage, but I know some people who do. So one of them ended up, being Latif at M13, and then we connected. We had a pretty good, I think, 30-minute intro call,
Yeah.
but it was, an intro call, so it wasn't like super, super deep. And he mentioned he was in New York, and I'm like, cool, I'll be in New York the next week. So I flew across the country,
Wow.
like met him in his M13 office. He was super lovely. Met his team, and then and then we got the deal done. And they've been
Yeah.
great partners. But yeah, so it was, I think, just like pounding the pavement.
Yeah, like and just doing like whatever it takes to get
Yeah.
those investors. Yeah, and as we move on to the third part of the podcast, talking about your current career, can you very briefly just describe your role and responsibilities as the CEO of Robin AI right now?
Yeah, so I think the fun thing about this job is that it changes every single day. But I think for me, like Robin right now is at a stage where it's really exciting and we're starting to get, this product that we spent a lot of, building into the hands of, real people. And we've
Hmm.
heard everything from, people like Red Sox players using this and Dodgers players. And, obviously we were 16-year-olds and 20-year-olds. We've heard that this like quote made me like better husband and father. We've heard
Hmm.
this helped me go on a date. This helped, save my marriage. So I think right now, like what I do every single day at Robin is pretty much like how do we, like really get this amazing product that we built into the hands of people. And what I learned over time is that it changes so often, right? And I think that's something that I really had to, like learn from. So in the beginning, it was like fundraising, and now it's like recruiting, having a great team together. And as we finalize that, right, then product and go to market. And it's kind of like every single time you get like remotely good at something, it's like, cool, your job changes. But like I actually really welcome that because it's a sign that we are growing and it's a sign that, like there's so much more to do and that, that we're doing, quite well.
Yeah. And what are some of the your like favorite things that you are currently working on for Robin right now? Any projects or any initiatives?
Yeah. So it's a secret. No, I'm kidding. But we have some really fun things coming down the pipeline for Robin. And it really is, like all about like connection. I think what I'm super excited about right now is rounding out like our C team. So we are hiring for two more people for an amazing product designer and then for a really amazing, founding backend developer. And like something that really energizes me is really, the team. Like I think like the energy that, we bring in terms of this is not, just my company, this is our company, right? And we're building something that we collectively believe is going to be a better reality. But in terms of specific projects, we have some really fun new features coming up and I'm also really excited, for our go to market. So we're doing a lot of, like content on TikTok, will be really bring Robin into people's hands like very, very soon. So that is what I'm super excited about.
Yeah, and where do you vision Robin to be in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so our goal for Robin is to, from day one is to see that people use it and they become more alive. And, our benchmark is that we want Robin to be the reason that billions of people become more alive and they feel more connected. And that's the scale that we're building for. And that's, like a very lofty goal that we're building for.
Yeah.
And, we want Robin to be a massive force for good, right? Like we want people to say, wow, because of what Team Robin built, I feel more connected today. Like I'm happier today. I want to go in the wild and see people using Robin in the subway and, on the streets of, New York City and San Francisco. And I think, and knowing that because of something that, we put our blood, sweat, and tears and life force into building, that other people's lives are much, much more improved. And that's why I went to med school in the first place, right? But now I get to just do that like at scale.
Yeah, and what has been the most rewarding part of building Robin so far?
I think it's just like hearing all the user stories,
Yeah.
hearing the people who use Robin is I remember the first time someone told me this made him a better father and a husband, and I was just like, that's insane.
Yeah.
That's an insane thing to say. It's an insane thing to think that something that, I built had that impact on someone. And the more we go, like the more feedback, we hear. We hear that, for example, one person left his review saying, hey, like this changed my life, like I got laid off and this like really helped me through that process and this 100% will change people's lives. I will tell everybody this. I've heard from another person that who was going through, a really messy divorce and was just like, they were obviously going through a very difficult time. And after using Robin for 3 days, they had a very different outlook on life. Obviously not going to solve, her problems, but it gave her, kind of what she needed to like really, really go on. And I think the power of Robyn is that it's not just about this, magical being, right? It's about reflecting you back to you. Like we named the company Robyn after Robin and Batman because I love
Mm,
Batman growing up, right? Like he didn't have, supernatural powers. He was just like some dude who chose to do good, right? And he could have very easily chosen to do bad. I think out of all the superheroes, he had like the most quote unquote darkness in him,
yeah.
but he did choose, to do good with what he could. And I always think that we all have an inner Batman, right? But you need a Robyn to remind you of, who you are and what you can do, and that, most things like are figure outable. I think there are a lot of things, also like that are not, right? I haven't been a doctor. I think there are some unsolvable problems. And I think that perspective gives me a lot of, gratitude on problems that we can solve. Whereas I think in business, most of our problems are very solvable problems, right? Like, yes, like fundraise, go to market. Like these are luxuries and privileges to even be able to have these problems. And I think, with Robyn, I very much want Robyn to be this magical thing in your pocket that reminds you who you are. That is a constant, partner in your becoming. That's literally we call ourselves as a partner in becoming because we think everybody has so much, inside them. And this is just something that reminds them of that.
Yeah. And what has been the hardest part of building an AI startup in such a crazy time of like the rise of so many AI startups? I feel like there's one like everywhere. So like
Yeah,
what has
there's
that
one.
like experience been like, maybe like differentiating yourself, but also just being in that time of like the AI kind of boom right now?
Yeah, it's funny, and maybe this is because I don't really, come from tech. I don't really think of it in terms of like competitors. When I was raising, we had already, closed our lead investor, and we had a lot of, some interest. And I was talking to this one investor, and he was like, "Yeah, I just don't know. We should build in the AI space. Like, I don't think you can compete." It was like, I don't think you can really compete. Um, and you should build a healthcare company, and Robyn is definitively not a healthcare company, and I think what I told him is that we are as much a healthcare company as Airbnb is a design firm, just to
Mm,
say that it's not, right? Just because the founders had, prior experience in those two, spaces, it gives, I think, you a lot of perspective that is helpful. But we've definitely, I think, had a lot people who are surprised that, like I'm building in this space, but I don't really think too much about competition. I am of the, opinion that I don't think, like, Robyn is going to be really affected by the competition and that like, oh, like a competitor built something similar and then you went out of business, right? Like I think it's my job to be aware of the competition, but I think there's a lot of focus right now, obviously, like on the social tech stack, right? And that's important. But I think there is so much hype and so much noise, especially in Silicon Valley, about, AI for everything, AI for laundry, AI for your dog, AI for workflows. And I really feel that like any brutal technology, right? Whether it's AI or the internet, it's still just a technology. And what I'm interested in is the people that are using the tech, right?
yeah.
Like, how do we best service the people at the end of technology? Because, like, Robyn, it's in its core, it's a celebration of actually being human, right? Like the messy bits and like the non-perfect bits. Because, we're not an AI, right? And I think if you go outside the Silicon Valley bubble and talk to people, like, they don't care what LLM you use, right? They don't care how many parameters raise. They just care that they have a problem, and if your product can help them with that problem, they feel better. That's it, right? And I think, for our team, I always tell the team that you don't have to worry about competition. We just focus on what we are building, right? Because we are the consumers, like, and I think the problem with, consumer is that I've heard a lot, oh, it doesn't work, consumer is very difficult. And I think it's difficult because, like, if you don't know, understand, or care about the consumer, you're not going to build a good product,
Yeah.
but we are the consumer. We talk to our users every single day. And I think that is why we're able to build something that really resonates because, we're building for ourselves, building for younger Jenny, we're building for the team, we're building for the people on our Discord that we talk to every single day.
Yeah.
So I very much focus on that instead of kind of like the next new shiny object that is, like in AI world right now. I focus on what do my users want to see? What do the humans that I'm building this for actually want to see? Like what are
Mm,
the real problems, right? Like loneliness or
yeah.
disconnection. Like those things are real. Those things are not going to change. And
Yeah.
that's what we're solving for.
Hmm. Yeah, and as we move on to the fourth part of the podcast, talking about challenges and overcoming obstacles, being an Asian American in leadership role comes with its own sets of challenges. What were some of the obstacles you may have faced in your industry, particularly due to your background, if you have faced any?
Yeah, I think as like it's funny, I picked two career paths that are very male dominated. Right, like very white male dominated, right? And like when I was a surgeon, like in neurosurgery, I was usually the only woman in the room, and less so, I think, in startups at Robyn. But still, it's a very much. I think there's a stat that 0.2% or 2% of VC money goes to female founders, and something like zero point 0.2 goes to women of color, which I think is a big problem. We should definitely fix that.
Yeah.
But I think it will always come with its own challenges. And for me, I don't dwell too much on them. I think it's just knowing the game that you're playing, like knowing the arena and then just doing it anyway. And then knowing that when you do succeed, that you will do everything you can to make this better for the future generation, right? So for
Mm.
example, at Robyn, like our team is like half female, half male. I didn't structure it that way. Like precisely, but like we just found like a lot of amazing talent, and some are men, some are women. And I think it's just important to, pay it forward. But in terms of challenges, I think through the lens of like all these problems that, a company will have, like I would say almost 100% are solvable problems, right? So how
Yeah.
do we solve that problem? And I think that's what I'm much more interested in. Like, yeah, sometimes, it's stressful, but it doesn't really help to dwell on the stress. I'd rather just turn it into action points.
Mm. Yeah, and what role has your cultural background played in shaping your leadership style and perspective as a business leader, and how have you found ways to use it as a strength in your career?
It's like that Hamilton quote, right? It's like immigrants, we get the work done. But yeah, I think like going back to my parents, right? Like they've worked so hard all their lives, right? To bring me here to the US, so so that I can have the opportunity that I do right now, so I can even, get to build Robyn, right?
Mm.
And yeah, I think, being an Asian American, like hard work and, work ethic was like ingrained to me from like day zero. And that
Yeah.
has definitely, really, really helped me. And I think also just from being a surgeon and having had that career path before this really gave me so much perspective and work ethic, right? Like as a resident you're just kind of like grinding. But I think that's probably the most important thing is just like if you want something you really have to go after it. You have to have ownership.
Mm.
And that my dad would always say when I grew up, he was like, no, nobody owes you anything. If you want something, you really, really have to just go for it.
Yeah. And that kind of leads on to the last part of the podcast, talking about advice and inspiration. So the first question is, what do you think makes someone a great leader?
Yeah, I think there's like a lot of things, but I think probably like the most important thing is that, really being able to like assemble like a good team. And then, I think leading with kindness is really important, right? Like kindness does not mean weakness, but I think like in this era of like, oh, like just like do it, like it's a very, very like, tech bro like
Yeah.
world. I do believe in leading with kindness. I think you have to give your team a reason to build, right? Like I ask a
Mm.
lot of my team, but I also give back a lot. And I think that is really, really important. Is that you want to create a place where people actually want to work, right? And when your vision and your mission becomes like their mission and their vision.
Yeah, and mentorship can play a huge role in one's success. Do you have any key mentors or role models? And if so, what is some of the best advice they have gave you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very, fortunate to be around people, like Lars and, like Bill. And I think in terms of, role models, like I've never met Melanie Perkins, in person, but I feel like I know her story very well, from, just her interviews. And I would definitely say she's a role model, not just because of like the company that she's built, but because of the culture that she's built and how committed she is of like actually doing good in the world. I
Yeah.
think that is something that is lacking, and that's something that I think there is. there is goodwill in the world that we should, really, really lean into.
Hmm.
I love that, she is giving away most of, most of her wealth, like in Canva, into making the world a better place. And, for Robyn from day one, like the reason I started this company is to help people connect and be a force for good. So that is something that I'm very passionate about is, whatever we built Robyn into, I want to give it back to society because it makes me happy personally to see that people have healthcare, that they have education, that, they are, like with their families, that they are happy, that they have safety. And I think that drives me so much more than any, valuation could.
Yeah. And how do you define success now, and how has that definition changed since the beginning of your career?
Yeah, so I think, for me, success is really like it's like consumer impact, right? It's like its impact on how many lives have we touched and how many stories can we find that it's like, oh, Robyn made my life better in this way, right?
Yeah.
It's funny when I was in, surgery, sometimes when people retire, right, they would make kind of like they'll have a event, there'll be a cake, and maybe there'll be like collage of people like saying, "Thank you, Dr. So and so, that you did my
Yeah.
surgery, you whatever, right? You saved my life." And I think success to me is when we can have 6 billion of those, for Robyn, like this is how Robyn made my life better.
Yeah.
And I think how amazing is it to be able to build something that can say, because of something that we built as Team Robyn, someone is alive today, someone lives a better life today. And it's something very few people actually get to say. And that's something that everybody who joins Robyn will be able to say.
Yeah. And if you were to go back to the beginning of your career when you were very young and tell your younger self one piece of advice, what would that be?
Oh, wow. Leave medicine earlier. I'm kidding. But I think I wouldn't really change anything because, there's a lot of things I learned along the way.
Yeah.
And I think even though like it's been a very unconventional, like
Yeah.
journey to founding Robyn, everything that I went through made me a much better founder than, personally for me speaking, had I, dropped out of Columbia and, built it as like a 20-year-old and, kind
Yeah.
of been more in the mold of Silicon Valley, I think I would be a far worse founder because
Hmm.
I wouldn't have the experience that I do right now. I wouldn't have the perspectives. I wouldn't have the, like the toughness that I do right now. And I think also just like the grace that's really, really important if you want to build something sustainable and that will actually inspire people to join. So I wouldn't really change anything, but I would tell her, be you're in for a wild ride. You're in for the ride of a lifetime.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Of
Love
course.
talking to you about your amazing journey and really the growth of Robyn and where it can go in the future. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.